In the 18th century, neoclassical art and architecture was the dominant style, so we need to know it well. At the same time, there were really important diverging trends that were going to challenge neoclassicism, and we need to start to look at them. So neoclassical architecture has a very clear visual language. It uses columns from ancient Greek and Roman temples, clear geometry, symmetry, order, regularity. It is familiar to us because it was the style used for civic buildings made in the new republic called the United States of America in the late 18th century. So here the US Capitol preserves this very idea of neoclassicism that we are studying. And it also shows us that this style was very much the style for public architecture, for public space, for public experience. And private experience will look different. Neoclassicism was also an iconography, a set of symbols that referred back to Greco-Roman culture, such as flowing garments and winged figures from pagan mythology. Neoclassicism wasn't just an interest in the style of ancient Greece and Rome. It was a complete identification with their cultural values. Or let's revise that to say a wish to think of themselves as being like Greece, the people of Greece and Rome. And I say a wish because, of course, Lady Bunbury didn't really worship the Greek goddesses or gods. She didn't even live in Greece. She lived in England, a Christian nation. She's playing the part of an ancient priestess. So the use of neoclassicism in this painting does include this quality of make-believe that we saw in the gardens, or we will see in the gardens of Stourhead. Next slide. So neoclassicism does have an element of fantasy, even though it signified at the time depth of mind, strength of character. So Stourhead is what I was alluding to, and here it is, the park at Stourhead, gardens designed by Henry Flitcroft and Henry Hoare. So we'll see these as an example of fantasy and play, but also changing ideas about nature itself. So this garden is not designed to look very designed. It's not ordered, clipped, and controlled like the art of the garden that we saw at Versailles. Instead, the idea is to let nature be nature. Let the garden feel flowing and a little bit wild, not entirely domesticated. Ironically, though, this vision of nature in this garden is actually based on art. It's based on paintings. So it's meant to look as if you have stepped into a painting by Claude Lorrain, a very important landscape painter of the 17th century. So his landscape paintings celebrate kind of the rolling, asymmetrical flow of nature, juxtaposed with a distant view of human habitation, right? This gold light feels autumnal and nostalgic. The trees act as kind of a living frame between the natural world and what we see of architecture in the distance, so that we as viewers are poised between nature and culture. Now, Stourhead as a garden is called a picturesque garden. It's remembered in this tradition, the story of landscape design, as this important garden where the idea of the picturesque was made the basic principle of the garden. Picturesque means as you see in pictures, like you would see in this painting. And so the Stourhead, with its picturesque design, includes free-flowing nature, but also these quaint fantasies of a bygone world with a charming rustic-style bridge, with old structures that appear to be falling into ruin. So you actually have cultural fantasies integrated with what is meant to feel like the open experience of nature. So thinking ahead, we will be seeing a lot of landscape painting in the 19th century. It will become very popular and important, and people will theorize about it. They will think, well, what are the things that we should know about landscape painting? And they will come up with different categories, that some landscapes are picturesque, Some are considered beautiful, and as in this side of this painting, beautiful in their flowing, kind of harmonious qualities, and some are sublime, which we see in the left side of this painting. The term sublime implies a confrontation with vast forces that are both terrifying and thrilling. So this storm coming in that can tear apart trees is an example of the sublime. And some landscapes will feel like haunted realms, where the past is calling out through the centuries and where the emotions are heightened. So the past is important in Neoclassicism, but in a different way. The idea of the past as a haunting, as nostalgia, as a source of emotions, that is important to what we call Romanticism. And Romanticism is emerging in the late 18th century, and it's going to become incredibly influential in the 19th century. One way to understand Romanticism is that it is opposed to Neoclassicism. It's opposed in that it explores not reason, but irrationality, not harmony, but disturbance, not mathematical knowledge and precision, but mystery. Fuseli's unforgettable painting, The Nightmare, is a defining example of those qualities. The woman wears a toga-like garment, but not to signify intellectual achievements or cultural grace. She's sprawled, unconscious, her limbs falling limp to the floor, and an incubus is squatting on her pelvis. An incubus, a creature who is said to steal women and have sex with them. Has he just had sex with her? Well, one answer might be, over here, what is that horse doing, pushing its snout through the red folds of the curtains? Sigmund Freud would say that horse is a phallic symbol. And in fact, Freud owned this painting, this very painting at one point. Freud, the writer who founded psychoanalysis and theorized the idea of the unconscious mind. And just to underscore the shock value of this unholy sexual imagery with the incubus, look back to Lady Bunbury and see how her body language, her positioning, and the composition all make her seem noble, ideal, and virtuous. Fuseli is not interested in any of that. Another important figure in early Romanticism is William Blake, who was a poet as well as a painter. And Romanticism in general, but especially with Blake, really introduces the idea of the eccentric, free-thinking artist whose originality breaks the bounds of conventional society. Blake was an absolute original. And he's imagining Newton, the great scientific mind Newton, here less as a scientist and more as an artist, as someone nakedly sitting on a rock as if he's at the beginning of time and brilliantly drawing with his compass. So that is a mathematical tool, but it also seems to be a tool for making the world as if he's making it purely from his imagination. And so he's a god-like figure. And you can see that if you compare Blake's Newton to the mathematical geniuses in Raphael's school of Athens. They are all solving equations and geometric problems together as a collective group through rational discourse. Blake's Newton seems to be creating the world from the power of his stare, of the intensity of his imagination. And this is what makes him seem godlike, as if he can create something out of virtually nothing. So like Neoclassicism, Romanticism actually had a preoccupation with the past. And Caspar David Friedrich's Abbey in the Oak Forest is a landscape painting, but it's a landscape painting that shows the remnants of architecture. But this is not classical architecture. This is the remnants of a Gothic cathedral. So at the same time that classical Greece and Rome were being revived in Neoclassicism, other imaginative figures, such as the novelist Horace Walpole, who wrote kind of horror stories, or mysteries, you could say, he is imagining a link back to the Middle Ages, when the architecture was not classical in its style, but it was what's called Gothic, with spires, with turrets and towers, with pointed windows, a very kind of delicate ornamental look. Well, here's the interesting twist, how different that is, and neoclassical, from this. Because this is also architecture, it's building, but what is this? This is functional. This is industrial. This is a bridge made out of iron to serve an efficient mode of transportation for an industrial revolution. Look, it's in Coalbrookdale, England. What a perfect name to commemorate coal and the coal-fired industrial revolution. This is a kind of a architecture that is about absolutely no ornament, no claims to beauty, simply get the job done. Because even as Romanticism and Neoclassicism are looking to the past, this new world is being made out of science. And so we'll have paintings like this one that commemorate the process of people starting to be interested in science. This is a scientific experiment set up as a kind of a display for an audience of non-scientists. And it actually, ironically, has a little bit of a romanticist quality to it because that light is so dramatic. And look at the emotion of the young woman. There's a bird that's being denied air to illustrate how the pump works, and she's afraid the bird is going to die. So, there's this gendered relationship where the girl is not interested in science. She's feeling the emotions that she feels for the bird, and the men are performing this kind of scientific pursuit of knowledge. So pay attention to the tension between all of these different interests, because part of what makes the 18th century so complex is that they are all in play.